It's that time of the year again, where we all collectively decide that being interested in ghosts and gore doesn't actually make us weird, but instead just festive. It's the time where we all see the indie horror games thrive and hear the word Spooktober in every video we watch. This Halloween, however, I wanted to do something a little different. Instead of playing the newest FNAF 2.8 Beyond the Shadow Realm game thing, I wanted to make a video about something not always associated with horror, but can still be at times considered spooky. Mystery! Mystery games have been around since we found out the murderer was Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with the revolver. And with this video, I wanted to focus on what makes a mystery game fun. Also, this is kind of a way to justify to myself that I didn't just spend the past 2 weeks playing an unhealthy amount of 2 video games for no reason. And so that's why the games we'll mainly be focusing on today are Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney and LA Noire. Noir. Noir. So grab your Halloween candy, get a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's talk about suspense and secrecy in games. Before we dive into the games themselves, I want to quickly establish what I think are the 3 main things a game needs to do in order to be great in the mystery genre. 1. Cases need to resolve everything. 2. Cases need to be interesting. And 3. Solving the cases themselves has to be fun. What I mean by this is that every clue you find, every witness you interview needs to have some impact in solving the mystery. If you have players collect a bunch of clues and they only end up using half of them, or some of the witnesses don't give you any useful information, then it's pretty much just filler content. Why on a second playthrough would I go and find these useless clues, or talk to these witnesses who give me nothing? However, I can safely say that for the most part, neither of these games do this. Everything that is added to the court record or the case notes ends up being used. The only thing I can maybe think of not following this is how sometimes you can have 2 similar clues that can be interchanged when you interview a witness. I think it's okay to do this though, since it can encourage multiple playthroughs. In some cases you'll end up solving differently than other people. But by the end of each case, you know the full story. There may be an overall bigger story going on in the background, but as far as the case's contents are concerned, everything is wrapped up by the end. In all actuality though, this is the easiest thing to do when making a mystery game. It's the baseline for it. If a game follows this rule set, well then it's just following basic story structure. It's the next 2 parts that really prove whether or not the game does good in the mystery genre. Whether your game is going for a realistic take on solving mysteries or trying to solve the impossible, you need to make sure that players actually like and are intrigued by the mystery. It should go without saying, but these types of games heavily rely on story elements. My friend who had never played Ace Attorney before even asked me if it was just a visual novel. And that makes sense, because for the most part, that's what it is. But what sets it apart from other visual novels is that the stuff you read in the game ends up also being your metaphorical weapons in court. You have to really pay attention to what people are saying and make sure to examine every last clue. And because of having to pay so much attention, this can make the game feel longer. So if the cases weren't interesting, then the game itself would just feel like a drag. It's kind of like going to see a movie that you don't like, but also have to answer questions halfway through about the plot to make sure you're paying attention. So, do these games accomplish in this category? Kind of. For Ace Attorney, I played the original trilogy on the Switch, so it's not crazy to think that out of 3 games, it may drop the ball a couple times. The second game, Justice for All, is definitely the weakest entry that I played. It has 2 good cases out of 4, but it also has 1 case that's a joke of a tutorial level, and another one that just drags on for no reason, and has a twist that's even out there for this game. Though the other 2 games, Ace Attorney and Trials and Tribulations, do a fantastic job at keeping things fresh and interesting. I can't tell you how many times I literally would spend minutes just pausing the game and then coming up with my own theories before I knew everything. There was even 1 case that became so complex that I actually ended up writing down my own notes so I could really piece everything together, which in turn immersed me further into the case, and it's probably the reason that it's my favorite of the entire trilogy. But what about LA Noire? Well, I don't think it does as good of a job as Ace Attorney, and I think that's for 2 main reasons. This is a much more realistic take on being a detective, whereas Ace Attorney makes it seem like the cases would all be impossible to solve, which makes them more interesting from the get-go. So this realism can be a drawback, but only slightly, because the truth is, if you have an interesting case while still being in the realm of realism, there's a good chance that the player will be even more immersed. But the other really main thing that brings it down is something called the homicide desk. For those who haven't played LA Noire, the game is split up into different sections called desks. Each desk has you investigating a certain type of crime. The homicide desk is obviously murders. You would think this would be an interesting one, but the problem lies in the fact that the developers wanted to tell a story of a serial killer you're trying to catch. So what ends up happening is each case is the same. a dead woman with an angry husband/boyfriend, and a secondary acquaintance that looks suspicious. There are 6 cases in the homicide desk, by the way. And by the 3rd case, it really just starts to become boring. And I think this is why I did so poorly on those missions. I felt like I was seeing the same thing over and over, so I started to not care about the details or the things that the witnesses were telling me. And as I said before, what separates these games from a lot of other ones is that the gameplay is in the story. If you have a game that has a bad story, usually you can just ignore it and enjoy it for the gameplay. But with these games, paying attention to the story is part of the gameplay. But of course, there is actual gameplay, which leads me to my final point. I made a reference to the board game Clue in the beginning of the video, and I think it's a really great example of making the act of solving a mystery fun. The game starts you out with just enough clues to get you theorizing, but rarely will you ever have something concrete. So gathering new clues and information can be really fun because you either slowly get to see your theory become true, or become shocked when you find out your guess wasn't right. Mystery games, at their core, are just putting together a puzzle without the picture for reference. So along the way, you try and guess what the picture will end up being. If the act of putting together this puzzle is monotonous and boring, then it doesn't matter how good the picture looks. What's interesting is that both of these games have a different approach on how they go about this. Ace Attorney is probably much more in line with what you think when you think of mystery games. Gather clues, talk to witnesses, then use all that evidence to find contradictions and catch people in their lies to solve the mystery. It's a very simple formula, but it works perfectly. Almost every time. Because it's making you look at the facts and solve many mysteries in themselves. This person's lying about the time because of a clock decoration. This person couldn't have known about the lamp being there. This handprint proves he was blackmailing her. When you solve these little mini mysteries, it makes you feel clever. And when you solve the entire mystery, you feel like you earned it because of how many smaller lies and contradictions you had to get through first. Now let's look at L.A. Noire. Now I'm not really going to focus on the shooting or chase sections, since that's more akin to just being a police officer, rather than solving a mystery. If you remember when this game first released back in 2011, you'll remember how much they talked about the facial expressions. It was one of the first games to have such detailed motion-tracked faces on almost all characters. At the time, it was considered groundbreaking for graphics, and it may look weird now, but it still gets the job done. And that job is to help players identify when characters are lying. That's how you solve the cases in these games. Yes, you do collect clues and sometimes use those clues to contradict lies, but a lot of the time you're focusing on how people are acting. Are they avoiding eye contact? Are they shifting in their seat a lot? Are they sitting in a closed-off manner? It's your job to figure out what their body language is telling you, and then if you have the evidence, use it to call them out on their lies. But it's not as easy as you may think. Maybe someone's avoiding eye contact, but it's more because they're sad about a loved one they just found out they lost. Honestly, unless you're playing with a guide, it's really hard to get all the interrogation questions correct. And that's another thing that differs about L.A. Noire. In Ace Attorney, you have to get all the questions right, and have to find all the contradictions to complete the trial. You don't have to do this with L.A. Noire. There are actually videos of people getting all the questions wrong on purpose, and you still solve the case. So when this happens, or to a smaller extent, you get a couple questions wrong but still arrest somebody, it doesn't feel as rewarding. Because the game just gave you what you needed, almost like you really had no impact on the case whatsoever. However, it can also make things even more satisfying when you get all the questions right, since you know that you can screw up and aren't able to retry. These games are definitely 2 of the best mystery games that I've ever come across. My advice if you're thinking about getting either of them is know what you want. You want to play a game where you're the best investigator and solve all the impossible mysteries perfect every time, using the clues, facts, and testimonies. Pick up Ace Attorney. Or, do you want a game that has a realistic take on what it was like to be a detective in the seedy underbelly of a city in the 40s? Being the only good cop in a police force that's mostly corrupt? Using your intuition more than not in order to dig to the truth of each case? You get L.A. Noire. Both of these games are fun because of how much creative effort needs to go into it just to make it barely good, let alone great. The story needs to be intriguing and suspenseful, the characters need to feel real and different, and on top of all that, the gameplay needs to be fun and unique. This isn't some game you can just mute and have fun shooting down waves of enemies. This is, as I said before, a game that makes paying attention to the story a part of the gameplay. Hey guys, just want to say thank you for watching this video, and hope you enjoyed the little review for the mystery games. Like I said, I wanted to do something a little different for Halloween, so hopefully you liked it. Let me know in the comments down below. I just want to give a quick shout out to Geo Chittle and MacLeod over on my Patreon. If you want to support me, link is in the description down below. But yeah, other than that, I guess you could just watch another video or rewatch